I know we're a minute to 7, so I'm not formally going to start, but poor Jessica is standing here like a trooper going through what is the slowest 5 minutes in history, which is the 5 minutes leading up to a program. So I figured I would jump on and at least do some jabber so that Jessica isn't like, again, just powerhousing through it. But welcome in. I'll welcome everyone in again in about 30 seconds. But hey, while you're sitting there waiting for Jessica to teach you some really cool things, don't forget to check out our entire winter calendar. Obviously, we're in the start of winter, right? Is up on schaumburglibrary.org. So make sure you're checking out things in January and things in February, because those programs are live and you're able to register for them as well, not just December. And hey, look, it's 7 o'clock. So welcome everyone formally into this evening's program. I'm Chris. I'm your adult programs coordinator at the Schaumburg Library, and I am so happy to be spending this evening with you and kicking off the holiday season with a fun holiday baking demo with our friend over here, Jessica Ellington. Before I hand things over to her and formally introduce her, I do want to go over a few of our friendly Zoom reminders for you guys. First off, your microphones and cameras are off. So if you have any questions for Jessica, you can throw those in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. I recommend using the Q&A because sometimes patrons like to chat with each other in the chat, and that way we don't lose any questions. We'll take all questions at the end of today's program. If at any point during the program you're experiencing technical difficulties, also use that Q&A to reach out to me. It's the easiest way for me to be able to go back and forth with you if you're experiencing a struggle, and I can do my best to help you with that as we go. You'll also notice that closed captions have been enabled, and you can turn those on or off as you wish during today's program. Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce Jessica. Sweet Bee founder Jessica Ellington is an executive pastry chef with over a decade of experience at some of Chicago's top restaurants, restaurant groups, and bakeries. Jessica created Sweet Bee, a pastry consulting and freelance company, in 2018. She also enjoys sharing her personal expertise, tips, and tricks with home bakers, and you can find her teaching classes online and in person throughout Chicago, including right here this evening on the Schaumburg Library Zoom. So Jessica, without further ado, thank you so much for being with us tonight. Take it away.
Okay, thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here and teach this class for you today. Yule logs, sometimes they're also called bûche de Noël. It's really just like a festive jelly roll, and it's all about the technique of getting it rolled. So that's what I'm really going to focus on today. We're going to go through making the cake. I'm going to show you a really quick and delicious buttercream recipe, and then we're going to get right down to it, and we are going to roll those Yule logs and shape them and make them look just like a little tree stump. I'm really, just an aside, I'm really tall, so I'm sorry. This is going to cut off the top of my head sometimes, and there's nothing I can do about it. I'm sorry, but I can't squat down. So that's just, it is what it is. But we are going to jump right in. There are recipes for this. If you haven't received them yet, you should be receiving them soon. We are going to make a chocolate sponge, which is a very aerated, very light chocolate cake. And then we are going to make a buttercream. And this buttercream is going to be made with whipped butter, sweetened condensed milk, and some melted chocolate. It's really easy. It's my favorite easy buttercream recipe. There's no measuring powdered sugar and getting powdered sugar all over your kitchen. It's rich, it's luscious, and I think you're going to love it. And hopefully we can spread the word on this new easy buttercream. So I think we should jump right into it. There's a little bit of magic of TV happening. Like I have a cake already baked behind me, but I'm going to show you how to bring everything together. We're going to start with our 2 cold eggs. So I just pulled these out of the refrigerator right before the program started. And these are large eggs. So I want you to pay attention in a recipe to what size egg they're telling you to use. And I know that sounds super picky or finicky. I think the most common sizes are large, extra large, but if you have jumbo eggs at home, I just want to tell you what the difference is. And this is going to get nerdy for a second, but that's kind of what baking is. It's all about science and chemistry. So when I crack open this egg, it's going to weigh about 50 grams, or it's going to be just under a quarter cup once I crack it open. Going up to an extra large egg, when I crack it open, the egg and the yolk together are going to weigh 60 grams. So there's a difference of 50 grams to 60 grams. Now that's not much. 10 grams is not very much, but it is 10% bigger. So if you're somebody at home who's having a hard time getting consistent quality out of your bakes, it could be that you're using a different size egg that's called for. So just want to throw that out there. I'm going to go ahead and put these into my bowl here. Oh, see, I like when like little things happen. You probably can't see it on your on the screen there, but I did get a little eggshell in my bowl. And so instead of like putting your finger in there and like the eggshell sort of like dances around your finger when you're trying to get it out, the eggshell wants to go home. This is its home and it'll act as a magnet. This is the shell that I just cracked open. So if you just scoop it in there, that little shell will sort of be attracted to its bigger counterpart and it'll come right out. This is why I love teaching classes, because as a professional pastry chef for a little over a decade, you just pick up all of these things working in the kitchen. And I love to share those with the home baker. My eggs are in there. Here in this bowl, I have my sugar and my salt. So this is, and you'll see on the recipe, I give it to you two ways. It's half a cup of sugar and that weighs 100 grams. I'm a big fan of weighing my ingredients. It's a very accurate way to sort of move through the ingredients. If you're not there, you don't want to invest in a scale, I get it. So I've given you the standard measures there as well. So my eggs and my salt are going to go right into this bowl. And then we're going to whip this. It's going to take about 5 minutes. We're going to bring it to something called ribbon stage. I'll stop my mixer along the way and just sort of talk about what's happening. So as this is whipping, we are incorporating air. We want that. That's what's going to give us a really nice texture to our chocolate sauce. The recipe instructions is different to what's called recipe. And I'll show you what that is when we get closer to show you than to tell you.
Hey, Jessica.
Your eggs with your sugar and salt. So just going to continue to become lighter and lighter and more and more.
Hey, Jessica, because it got so close to the camera, we can't hear it, but it somehow is, we're not able to hear you as well. So just if you can keep the beaters farther away. When we test it,
will you just
will
you give me a thumbs up in a second once I turn this back on?
Yeah.
Make sure you hear me. Okay. Can you hear me now? Sorry about that. So what's happening here in the bowl? As the eggs and the sugar and the salt are beating together, we're incorporating it. We want that because we have a nice light chocolate. And as it's looking, the color is going to get lighter and lighter. This dark yellow mixture is going to become like more pale yellow. And you'll see the volume of it starting to come up in your bowl. I'm just going to pause here for a second so you can see what's happening since I'm not right in front of the camera. So it's nice and pale. I'm going to look so you can see there's lots of air incorporated in it. There's like tiny bubbles on top of the surface here. And so when a recipe instructs you to go to ribbon stage, what that means is you should be able to lift up your beater. And as that mixture falls back onto itself, it should mound for just, a second or two before it sort of settles and levels back out. So right now, as I'm lifting this up, it is immediately settling back into the mixture. So we need to keep going. I'm sorry, a handheld mixer here for him. If you have a stand mixer at home, you can just throw it in your stand mixer on high speed and set a timer for 4 or 5 minutes and then carry on for setting up your recipe. And then you can come back. If you're doing it in a stand mixer, you want to make sure you're using the lift attachment and not the flat attachment. We're just about there. Might be it, or we might need just a few more seconds. I'm going to give it just like another 30 seconds. I know it's hard to tell there in that camera. It's holding up for about half a second before it's settling back down. So I'm going to give it about another 30 seconds. Okay, we're there. I'm gonna grab a spatula to see if I can demonstrate this a little bit better. There we go. So I know it's creating shadows here. You just want to see it mounding just a little bit right on top of itself. Another good trick is to, like trace a letter, like make it, my name's Jessica, so I just naturally go to a J. See if you can get to the beginning to the end of that letter and still see it sort of sitting on top. So those are sort of your visual cues when you're making your sponge. And baking is a lot about using our senses. It's about, observing and seeing things, but it's also smell and sometimes it's sound. When I'm making bread at home in my machine, I'm listening to how the bread is sort of slapping against the side of the bowl. Obviously, it's about taste. But you use a lot of your senses when you're baking. So now that this is ready, before the program started, I melted some unsalted butter because I already put salt in here. If all you have is salted butter at home, omit the salt with the sugar mixture. I've got a little bit of vanilla extract. And we need 1.5 teaspoons. I'm just going to eyeball it. I'm also going to talk about some different ways that you can sort of customize this and make it your own. So I think there's that was like 1.5 teaspoons that was left in there. So you could omit the vanilla altogether. You could do orange extract, almond, coffee, 'tis the season. You could do peppermint. So here's where you can start to sort of play with those flavors a little bit. You can do this on the machine, but I'm going to bring this over here so you can see it and you can hear me. So my butter and my extract are in here. I'm just going to pour it in really quickly. And I'm just going to stir this together. I don't want to see any streaks. That looks good. It's better to sort of undermix this than it is to overmix it. I have to sort of know when to leave well enough alone. And then here in this bowl, I have my flour, which is really not very much. It's 1/3 cup or 45 grams. My cocoa powder is in there. It's on the bottom. You can't see it. And then my baking powder and my baking soda, which are acting as leaveners. I've got that set over a bowl, and I'm just going to sift everything. You don't want any lumps because we're going to mix this very gently, and any lumps that are in there are never going to work themselves out at this point. So I've got some clumps of cocoa powder here in the bottom. I know that they'll sort of break apart, so I'm just going to put a little bit of muscle into it and push that through my strainer. Get everything out. And in that sifting process, that sort of mixes a little bit as well, but I'm just going to come back and mix that really quick so that it's homogeneous. Okay, so a lot of air has been whipped into our eggs. That's going to help leaven it in the oven. And then the little bit of baking powder and baking soda are going to give it sort of its last little push to make it even more airy. So this is going to go all in. And then I'm going to fold this together. So folding is a mixing technique, the way that whipping is a mixing technique or kneading is a mixing technique. When you see the word fold, it just means gentle, okay? So you'll see that my arm is really close to my body. Everything that I'm doing is in my wrist. Your wrist is generally pretty weak. So I'm not getting any like chicken arms in there. I'm not getting my upper arm into it. It's just in the wrist. And I'm starting on the bottom. And I'm pulling that spatula up towards me. When I get to the top, I'm going to rotate my bowl with my left hand, counterclockwise. If you're left-handed, you're going to do it the other way. So you're going to pull it towards you and then rotate the bowl clockwise. You can see that cocoa powder is getting mixed in. The mixture is getting darker. You want to make sure that there aren't any streaks. And as soon as you can no longer see streaks, it's mixed. So I've got just a little bit up on the side, so I am going to scrape it down. And then what I want to do is I'm going to come all the way across the bottom and just sort of flip it over on itself just a couple of times to make sure I don't have any pockets of that sugar and egg mixture, any pockets of dry ingredients. Okay, so this is ready. we're gonna get our pan ready, which technically you should have done before you started whipping this, but this is real life. This is what happens. I have this is called a quarter sheet pan. If you don't have one of these, you can use a 9x13 baking dish, whether it's glass or metal, but the measurement of this is 9x13. I know that there are jelly roll pans that exist. The dimensions are a little bit different. This recipe might work in there, but for sure I know it works in a quarter sheet pan, and I know that it works in a 9x13. So I'm going to take a little bit of my pan spray, and I'm just going to spray an X here on it, and then I'm going to lay my parchment paper on top. And that little X is going to just hold that parchment paper in place. And then just as some added security, I'm going to spray the parchment paper. I'm going to do it over my sink so I don't get spray. Normally I would say if you don't have parchment paper, it's fine, just use pan spray, but we're actually going to use this parchment to help roll our Yule log in a little bit. So here I think parchment paper is. I'm going to take my sponge mixture and put it into my pan. So you'll notice I'm not just doing a mound in the center. Remember, we're trying to work this as little as possible. So I made a little strip sort of from the one end to the other, so that I don't have to move it quite as much. And then I'm going to be using, this is called an offset spatula. It's called that because the blade is just a little offset from the handle here. And it's really great for spreading. If you don't have this, your rubber spatula is fine. A knife is fine, whatever you have. I'm a big fan of use what you have. It's not always necessary to go out and get something specific. So I'm just going to gently start pushing this into the corners and along the side. And I'm going to turn my pan as I go rather than trying to turn my body. I'm going to turn the pan, just being nice and gentle. And we want to get it even-ish. It'll even out a little bit in the oven. It won't spread a ton, but it'll spread a little bit to sort of even out any, minor inconsistencies in there. Just going to sort of go around these edges one more time. My offset is at a slight angle, probably like a 45-degree angle. Going all the way around those edges, trying to get it even. And that's it, I'm done. I'm just going to take this little bit that's on the back of my spatula here and put it right here in the center. I already have my oven preheated to 350 degrees. I'm going to put this on the center rack. And it's going to take about 8 to 10 minutes. I baked one earlier. It was 10 minutes, so that's what I have my timer set for. I'll show you what that looks like when it's done. Whenever you see a time in a recipe, it says bake 8 to 10 minutes. That's a guideline. Maybe it only takes 7 in your oven. Maybe it's going to take 11 or 12 minutes. So I'm going to show you what it looks like, and I'm going to tell you what it should feel like when it's done. So that 8 to 10 minutes is just a guideline for you. Under most circumstances, that's how long it's going to take, but every oven is different. And I know that's frustrating. That's, I think, the most frustrating part about baking is that every oven is a little bit different. So sometimes you have to make adjustments. I'll show you what it looks like, and I'll talk about what it should feel like. And when it's done and when it's ready, when it comes out of the oven, this is my trick. There's lots of tricks for making Yule logs and getting it in that nice round shape. So as soon as it comes out of the oven, I cover it with a piece of foil. So we're not going to lay out a dish towel covered with, powdered sugar or cocoa powder and powdered sugar. This is my trick. Put the foil on. That's going to retain all of the moisture inside of the cake, which is going to keep it pliable. And we're going to let it cool until it feels kind of neutral. It doesn't feel warm and it doesn't feel cool. If I put my hand on the counter feels cool. But this feels, maybe just slightly cooler than body temperature. And that's what we're going for, about 78 to 80 degrees. So as I touch this, remember, you don't want it to be warm. You just want it to be cool. And that's where we are. And I've got it actually just sitting on top of my oven because my oven is on and it's keeping it at the perfect temperature. So I'm just going to put this back over here for now, and then we're going to move on to butter. real quick, don't go anywhere. I just need to wash my beaters quickly. I'll dry these off. Again, this buttercream, you could do it in a stand mixer if you have one, and you're going to use that same whip attachment or whisk attachment and not the paddle attachment. I'm just going to flip to the buttercream recipe. So before the program started, this is 2 sticks of butter, and I whipped it for about 5 minutes. So just for like a reference, I don't know if it's going to show up or not, but this is really like soft and aerated. It's nice and pale in color. And that's what we're going for. It's like a similar technique to the sponge that we were making. I don't know if this is going to work, but if I put this butter, maybe a little bit, you can see how much more yellow the stick of butter is compared to the 2 sticks that I whipped. It's much lighter in color. So that's what you're going for. It should almost look like, you know, like a creamier whipped cream is kind of what you're going for. So my butter's in there. I'm just going to add a pinch of salt, and you'll notice with the cake, I added a little bit of salt. With this buttercream, I'm going to add just a little pinch of salt. I'm a big fan of salt, even in my desserts. If you cook at home and you can have salt, you probably cook with salt because it just makes food taste better. It makes all food taste better, including desserts. So this isn't going to be like a salted chocolate situation. It's just going to taste, it's going to mellow out the sugar a little bit, and you'll get to taste the chocolate a little bit more. So I really like to do that. So once the butter is whipped, we're going to slowly add in sweetened condensed milk. So you've all seen this in the baking aisle. It's a 14-ounce can. This is going to go into the buttercream. This is going to be our inside our Yule log as well as outside on the Yule log. So this is going to be quite a bit of frosting. So I'm going to move this back over here so that you can hear me. And you just want to take your time adding this in. Before I do that, I just want to grab, I have 5 ounces of unsweetened chocolate that I melted before we got started. And I had it sitting on top of the oven, staying melted. But now that we're making the buttercream, I want this to cool just a little bit before we add it in. So I'm going to set that off to the side. So I'm going to turn my mixer back on. I'm going to start up slowly. Go to like medium. And I'm just going to very slowly add the sweetened condensed milk. You want to make sure as it's going into the bowl, you're avoiding the sugar. So move my fingers off to the side. Add a little bit of milk. Get that mixed in before I add the next little bit. With the hand mixer, it's probably going to be about a tablespoon at a time. I'm not going to measure it. That's just butter flying all over it. You don't have to measure it. Just kind of eyeball a tablespoon at a time. Sure it's fully mixed. And you can just take a mess. If you're doing this in the hand mixer instead of the hand mixer, that mixer can be going and you can just slowly pour it in. You don't have to stop. You can just get a nice slow stream. But I find the hand mixer. Every once in a while, I'm just going to come in. I also make a version of this with same amount of butter, but I can mix chocolate all together. Instead of condensed milk, I use dulce de leche, which is essentially caramelized condensed milk, and you can make it. Really highly recommend. You can also omit the chocolate and just use the, vanilla. You can add some vanilla extract or vanilla. You can also really play with the flavors here and add different extracts, coconut or raspberry, or and people love chocolate orange. Those people are here. Orange extract with orange zest. It's really good. I put them in. They're like freeze dried strawberries, dried blueberries. Really hard and crunchy. Crush them into the powder. Those into a buttercream before strawberry buttercream. So this is where you can get really good. That's the first one. I've got to scrape out my can here. You can also use any frosting of your choice. If you have a recipe that you really like, maybe you really like, standard American buttercream with the butter and the powdered sugar. Maybe you like an Italian meringue buttercream. Maybe you like, the stuff in the can at the grocery store. That's fine. I'm all for convenience. If that's what you like, feel free to use it. You could also, on the inside of the Yule log, do a whipped cream or, a Cool Whip if you wanted to keep it dairy free. Lots of options to sort of play with this and make it your own. Just going to scrape this in, and then we're going to give it one last go round, and then we can add it. Okay, I'm positively wearing this frosting. Let me show you what we've got in here. It's really creamy and luscious. We're going to add the chocolate. I'm just going to test this. I want to make sure that it's cool enough to add. I'm just going to take the spatula. I'm going to put a little bit just right here on the inside of my wrist. It's a really sensitive area, and it shouldn't feel warm at all. Body temperature is 98 degrees. The melting point of butter, which we have in here, is 83 degrees. And I know, again, that sounds like super nerdy, but that's important to know. If your chocolate felt warm to the touch and you put it in here, it would absolutely melt your butter, which we don't want. So I'm just gonna go all in here. And I like to use unsweetened chocolate. I'll show you what I use here in a second, because the sweetened condensed milk itself is so very sweet. For me, I find that I really like it with unsweetened chocolate to really balance out the sweetness of the sweetened condensed milk. But if you have a big old sweet tooth, you could use, like a 70% dark chocolate or an 80% dark chocolate, or, you could use a chocolate chip here. That would be fine. When you're melting chocolate chips, sometimes they get a little bit gloopy. The technical word, gloopy, because there's a stabilizer in them that helps them keep their shape when you put them inside of a chocolate chip cookie. And so when you melt it, sometimes it's like a little bit on the thicker side, but that's fine. That's, you can still use them. I'm just telling you what's gonna happen. That's all mixed in. I think I am gonna give it one more go around with the mixer, just to make sure it's fully incorporated. Okay. All done. A little bit of frosting here on my board. This looks great. This is ready. It's pretty hot in my kitchen. I've had the oven on for quite some time. So while we're talking about the cake and while we're getting the cake ready, I'm just gonna pop this in my refrigerator for a couple of minutes to help that butter firm back up because it is so warm in here. I think it would be fine, but I just wanna make sure. So that frosting can be made, you know, a couple days in advance. You could double it so that you had extra frosting and put it in the freezer, you know, for several weeks if you wanted to. It's a really great recipe. It's really versatile. And like I said, you can make it ahead. It's going to get firm in the refrigerator. Just let it come to room temperature and then beat it again for just a minute or two to sort of soften it up and reincorporate everything. Okay, without further ado, I'm going to bring over our cake. Okay, it still feels sort of neutral to the touch. Counter still feels cold, this still feels neutral. I'm putting down a silicone baking mat to help keep my counter clean. A cutting board would be fine. A large piece of parchment paper will be fine. I like it because it doesn't slide on the counter. I'm going to uncover the cake. I'll just show you the back side of the foil. It might be hard to see, but there's a little bit of condensation on here, which is totally normal because of steam releasing from the hot cake. It's going to sort of collect on top of the foil. And it looks like maybe the foil was touching the cake a little bit. So that's what this really dark brown is, but that's fine. We're going to cover the whole thing in frosting and it doesn't matter. Okay. Cake is done. I'm going to grab that really quick. So this is what it looks like. You can see it looks kind of speckled or pocked on the top. And this is all of the air that we beat into the cake. This is the that air that's in the cake when it goes into the hot oven. That air expands to create steam. So you're going to see sort of this effect on the top. That's just like us doing a really good job beating a lot of air into our cake. So this is what it should look like. Okay, it looks dry on the surface. It doesn't look wet anymore. Now I'm going to press here in the center and it's going to give a little bit. You might even be able to see sort of where I push on it. Might leave a little bit of an indentation, but it feels firm underneath. It doesn't feel squishy at all. It feels nice and firm. If it feels squishy, or sometimes you can even hear that it's squishy, give it another minute, minute and a half, depending, and then check it again. And this is the feel test that you want to make sure. This is a very moist cake. A toothpick test is not going to work. It's going to have a lot of moist crumbs on it. Well, now that you know that, it's going to have a lot of moist crumbs on it. So if you want to do the toothpick test, that would be fine as well. It's just not going to be like a normal toothpick test on a cake. It's going to look a little bit different. Okay, and then as soon as this comes out of the oven, this is how I'm going to set it over here. Got a piece of foil, and I'm just going to cover it on all the sides. And I'm going to use my hot mitts to like really secure it around the edges of it. And then depending on, the ambient room temperature inside of your kitchen, maybe 10 to 20 minutes is how long that'll take. So now that this is cool, I'm going to take my offset spatula again, and I'm going to run it around all 4 edges of my cake to loosen it. And then I'm just going to lift one corner. This is where the parchment and that pan spray on the bottom really come in handy. Okay, I'm going to, let's see, how do I want to do this so you can see it? I'm going to lift up 2 opposite corners. So I've got the top one up here and the opposite bottom one down here, and just in one motion. So I'm going to lift it up. That parchment paper is fully supporting that cake. I'm pulling my hands sort of away from each other, and then I'm going to put it down. And then I'm just going to double check that as I fold this back or start to roll it, that it's going to release from my parchment paper. And it is. You can see that. It's going to release from my parchment paper. The parchment is going to help us roll the cake once the frosting is on there. Let me grab the frosting. So this is roughly probably a little bit more than 2 cups. This is probably about 3 cups of frosting. Most of it is going to go on the outside of the cake. I'm not using an exact measurement here, but you want to start with about a cup. Okay, and then again, I'm going to use my offset spatula to spread the frosting all over the cake into a nice even layer. I'm not covering the edges quite yet. I'm going to try to keep this nice and tidy. And again, I'm not going to turn my body to spread the frosting. I'm going to turn the cake to spread the frosting. This is really fun to do with kids or like a group of people for like a holiday party or your holiday gatherings. The recipe doubles really easily, so you could absolutely do 2 of these, and you could do sort of 2 different flavors if you wanted by playing with extracts or like different fillings. Buttercream, whipped cream, mousse would be really good. I suppose you could also do like a jam or a jelly. That's kind of traditional for a jelly roll and not so much for a Yule log. But, when you're at home, you do whatever you want. You do what sounds good to you. For me, the easiest way to tell if something is really even is just to come down at eye level so I can see if there's any sort of glaring, peaks or valleys in my frosting. That all looks pretty even. So now I'm just going to go to my edges here. I'm going to start rolling at the end that's closest to me. So once this is all to the edge, I'm going to grab a little bit more frosting, and I'm going to mound it up here on this edge closest to me so we can start that spiral. I like to see sort of like a thick frosting in the center when we cut into it. You'll see I'm using the edge of my bowl periodically to scrape off the edge of my offset spatula. I'm going to come under here. I'm going to loosen that a little bit from the parchment paper. You can't see what I'm doing. There we go. So it's loosened from the parchment paper. I'm just going to sort of take that up and over that first amount of frosting, that little mound that we made. So I'm going to start moving the parchment paper to roll it. You can't see because my hand's in the way. So I'm not just pulling it sort of this way, I'm also lifting it up as I go so that it comes up and over the frosting. If you need to sort of straighten it out or make it a little bit rounder, again, that parchment comes in super handy, trying to make it nice and round. The nice spiral on the inside. Okay, and then you want to go up and over the parchment so that you can slide that parchment away. Perfect. And then I want to make sure that that seam, so my seam is right here, right now. So I'm just going to go back a little bit so that that seam is really weighted down by the cake. Okay, that's step one. And when you're at home, you know, if something happens and it cracks on you, maybe it got overbaked a little bit, maybe there wasn't enough pan spray, just keep going. Go through the steps, go through the process. Remember, you're covering this with, you know, frosting or whipped cream or whatever you choose to put on top. Nobody's ever going to see that. Just keep going. It's going to look beautiful in the end if something happens as you're rolling it. I'm going to grab a cutting board. Well, actually, before I do that, I'm going to take a look at my ends here. It's hard to tell because the frosting is like the same color as the cake, but sometimes the ends don't have quite enough frosting in there. It's like a little bit thinner on the ends. So if I were to get an end piece at this point, I might be a little upset because it has less frosting. But maybe you like less frosting and you want the end to be your piece, and that's totally fine. But I'm just going to come back and I'm going to just shove some frosting in the ends so that it's nice and level. I don't know if you can see that there's just a little gap, and you can't see it. There's a little gap in there. I'm just using my offset spatula to shove that frosting in there. I think that's good. Okay. I'm going to move that just out of the way for a second. I'm going to grab a cutting board. I want the long side of the Yule log facing me so that my short sides are to my left and to my right. Now we're going to cut the little stump of our Yule log. I'm going to use a serrated knife. So that just means that it's your bread knife. It's the one that has the little teeth on the end of it. I'm going to come about a quarter of the way from either end. I'll do the left end here. So if this is about halfway, I'm going to go in between the middle of the end and that halfway mark. Okay, I'm not cutting yet, but that's about a quarter of the way. Now I'm going to rotate my knife about 45 degrees so that I can cut it off at an angle. Now, as I'm cutting, I'm letting the teeth do all of the work. I'm really not pressing down at all. I don't want to smush all of those layers that we just made. So I'm just moving my knife back and forth, super exaggerated back and forth, and letting the teeth of that serrated knife do all of the work. Go all the way to the bottom, and then I'll pull that out. So I have set up a little platter here, a large platter. And I'm going to put 2 pieces of parchment, small pieces, overlap them ever so slightly. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the Yule log on top. I'm going to frost it on the platter. And then when I'm done, I'm gonna remove the parchment paper. You can also use a like cake board round that you typically find from a bakery. I tell you what size. I think I say 8-inch. I don't see it immediately, but an 8-inch is what you want. So I'm going to go ahead and put that down here. Like this. And then with your little stump, you can go wherever you like. I'm going to do it on top. And so I'm going to put the angled end. You see that nice, you see that spiral on the inside with all the frosting. So play with it a little bit. I think I'm going to do like that, just at a slight angle. I think that looks good. I'm going to take just a little bit of frosting and do just a smear here in the center to act as glue. So that'll really stick to the cake. Okay, and now the fun part. We're just going to cover this with frosting, and we're not going to be super particular about it. What we want to do is cover the cake with frosting, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to show you a super simple way to make it look like a log. So you just want to make sure all the cake is covered. And remember, you're moving your platter or your cake board around as you're frosting instead of trying to twist your body. Nobody needs to, you know, throw out their back or their neck before the holiday season. I'm being really generous with the frosting. I want to make sure we cover that cake all the way. I'm working my way sort of around my little stump here on top. I like an offset spatula for this. I know I said that before, but for this particular job, that little offset part makes it really easy to spread this on. And when I'm holding it, I'm right-handed, I'm holding it here, and then my pointer finger is just sort of here where the blade meets the handle. It's right at the tip of the handle, and that finger, that pointer finger, is sort of maneuvering the offset spatula with my wrist. Turning the cake as I go. Get the end here. I'm being a little bit careful when I'm spreading, but I don't have to be too careful because that parchment's there, and I'm going to pull it out when I'm all done. Get this other end. And see, I'm not being super gentle or ginger as I'm moving my platter around. This is nice and secure on here. If you had any doubts or any worries, you could glue your stump on and then pop it in the refrigerator for like 5 or 10 minutes to sort of set that first little glue of buttercream under your stump, and then you could carry on. Just going to use my hand here. Sometimes hands are the best tools. So I'm going up from the stump to the log to make that sort of seamless on there. We're almost there. Still plenty of frosting left in the bowl. If you were worried, there's going to be enough frosting. Just this back half here and the top, and then we are all done. Okay, I think everything's covered except the top part here. I always cover the top of the stump. If you didn't backfill that frosting in there, you could see the, oh no, that's the part that we cut. Anyway, you could leave this top part unfrosted, and then you could sort of, it would be like the exposed part, you know, of the log, a little bit, you know, rustic looking. You're the boss when you're at home. You can do whatever you want. No matter what, they're gonna love it. It's gonna be delicious. Okay, everything's covered. I see a little piece of cake sticking out right there and right there. Okay, I'm gonna clean off the back of my spatula, my offset spatula. And I'm gonna trace it along the cake, starting at the bottom, just lightly sort of dragging it through. That's a better word than trace. Just dragging it through. It's not removing very much frosting. You see, it's just like the tiniest little bit on the back of my spatula there. So you're not removing the frosting. The spatula is nice and flat against the cake. But what we're doing is we're creating these little ridges that are gonna sort of look like bark. You could also use a fork. You could use just, you know, like a butter knife would be absolutely fine. Working my way around the stump. You don't want there to be a buildup of frosting, so just make sure you're constantly swiping that off. Otherwise, your lines aren't going to come through very well. I'm going to work my way up on the stump. And if I didn't say this, this is totally optional. You could just sort of leave it rustic, smeared on there. Everybody's going to know exactly what it's supposed to be. It's going to look just like a log. One little bit there. If you wanted to get fancy, could make little rings on the center part of the log, just sort of making a half circle and then a half circle. To make it look like the rings. I don't even know if you can see that. Log is frosted. I'm just going to get some things out of my way so we have room to decorate. Sort of pulling these out a little at a time. I'm going to need some assistance from my offset spatula to hold that in place. Great. And we'll do the same thing over here. So I'm sort of tucking my offset just right under that log to not disturb the frosting. If anything gets disturbed, we'll just come back and we'll fix it. I don't have quite the right angle. I'm going to swing this around. Okay, this looks pretty good. I'm just going to smooth this out over here. And I'm going to add just a touch more frosting on this side. But then, let's see. There we go. I bought a couple of little things. I have some just like little greenery and some little holly berries that I'm going to use to just decorate the platter. Oops. We'll do it this way. Those just came, I think, from the dollar store. And then I have, these are, they're called icing decorations. I picked these up at Target last week. So anything called icing decorations is really great. It's just like a really hard kind of icing. The other thing that works really well are cupcake toppers. Excuse me, cupcake toppers. They have like little toothpicks in them, and you can use them to like sort of decorate your log a little bit. Mushrooms are typical of a Yule log if you can find them. That's like really cute and kind of kitschy. I'm just going to use, got like a couple little trees here and some pine cones, which I thought was like really cute. I'm just going to stick these on like in a couple of different places. Maybe we'll do a couple trees side by side over here. Got a little owl, which is not really Christmas themed, but it is really cute. But I'm sort of in front of this tree over here. And that's it. Hold this up so you can see. There's our Yule log. So you can see how I sort of made those rings in the top up there. This is going to be much easier to slice if it's had time to set up in the refrigerator. So I do recommend that you pop it in there for at least an hour to sort of get everything set. You could do this a day in advance, no problem. If you wanted it to come to room temperature before you enjoyed it, I'd let it sit out at room temperature for maybe about 30 minutes just to sort of take the chill off it so it's not so cold, and then you can slice it and serve it. And that's it. I hope that you thought this was really a lot more simple than you thought. I hope that I was able to give you some good tips and tricks, that you picked up some ways that you can customize this for yourself at home. And I'd love to welcome any questions if any came in during the program.
Absolutely. We have a bunch of questions. The first one, while I pull up the Q&A, can you just quickly hold that cake up one more time for one of our patrons? Thank you so much. So first question, how many days in advance could I make a Yule log, and how is it stored before? Obviously, you just said in the fridge for an hour, but is there any other way you would store it, especially if you made it a certain number of days, more than one in advance?
Sure. So it depends on the filling. I'm going to talk about this specific cake with this specific buttercream, very refrigerator friendly. The only thing that I'd be a little bit, leery of is that this time of year, we're cooking a lot, and there might be something in your refrigerator that's giving off, maybe it has garlic in it, or maybe it has onions. So if you have some way to cover it, whether that's like a cake carrier, especially if you did it on a on an 8-inch board, and you can find really pretty ones. They're foil covered, so they're a little bit thicker. They're like a styrofoam or something, and they have really pretty foil that comes in all kinds of colors, white and silver and red and green. If you did it on a cake board and then into a cake carrier and then into the refrigerator, at least 2 days, 3, I think would also be fine. If you have like a Cool Whip or a whipped cream filling, just a day in advance, the cake is going to start to absorb that whipped cream or Cool Whip as opposed to absorbing the buttercream.
Awesome. What kind of brand of chocolate do you like to use?
Oh, so this is what I use. I said I was going to show this to you, and I didn't end up doing it. So this is from Yule. It's the their organics. This is the unsweetened chocolate, so it's just the cacao. It's quite bitter. I think that goes really, really well with the sweetness of the sweetened condensed milk. But if you wanted something like just a dark chocolate, you can find really great grocery store brands You can always find Ghirardelli, which I think is great. Sometimes you can find a brand called Guittard. It looks like guitar with a D on the end. That's a really good brand. I've also seen at grocery stores, Scharfenberger, something along those lines. That's also a really good chocolate. You know, but it's also okay to just use what you have on hand. And if that's chocolate chips, it's fine. If it's a different kind of bar, that's fine as well.
Awesome. If I wanted to do a chocolate orange, do I add orange extract to cake batter or frosting? And how much extract would I add?
So things like almond extract, orange, or like a lemon extract are, I would say, significantly stronger than a vanilla extract or a coffee extract. So if you're using something like a lemon, an orange, or I said almond, but I also wanted to say peppermint. If you're using one of those four, I'd go with about half the amount. You're going to get sort of more punch in the frosting. It's not going to be lost completely in the cake, but it's getting baked out a little bit in the cake. So if you really wanted that punch, I would do it in the frosting, or I would do it in the frosting and cake.
Awesome. How many does the bûche de Noël reasonably serve?
That depends on how big your cake slices are. 8. I would say easily 8. And it's rich. So a little bit goes a long way, but if you're lightening it up with, like, you know, whipped cream or something, it's not going to be as rich, but easily 8. I would feel comfortable saying, you know, 8 to 12 if those 12 were just a little bit on the smaller side.
Awesome. We had a guest ask about the mat you used to roll the cake, and another guest chimed in and said it was a silicone mat, but do you have a preferred brand of silicone mats?
No, the one, it's in the sink now and it's kind of dirty, but the one that I have just came from, I know they don't exist anymore, but Bed Bath & Beyond. So it's a half sheet size is the size that I use, but you can find them at Sur La Table, you can find them at Williams Sonoma. I think even like grocery stores have them now. You can certainly find them online through Amazon. It just needs to be a silicone baking mat. And what's great is you can keep reusing it. You can bake on it. So if you had one for a quarter sheet pan, you could absolutely do your sponge on a silicone baking mat instead of a piece of parchment paper. I just put mine in the dishwasher when I'm done using it, or you could hand wash it. And you can just keep using them and using them and using them and using them. The only thing is, you'll notice that after I had rolled it, I moved the cake to a cutting board. Don't cut on it because you will slice it.
I never thought to put my I have silicone mats, and I never thought to put them in the dishwasher, and they are the most irritating thing to hand wash because they're so floppy. I usually just leave them on the sheet, but like now that
they get like a little bit like a little bit of residue on them, so they feel kind of like slippery or like greasy almost.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just put it over a plate in the dishwasher, and they're perfect. I mean, this is one of those things, you know, working in restaurants and bakeries for so long, you know, working at places that have dishwashing machines for restaurants. I mean, everything goes in the dishwasher. So it's like one of those tricks where it's like, oh, I can do that at home too.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you refrigerate the cake until you cut it, which you said you could do, or you could give it the 30-minute after, or like outside of the fridge?
I do recommend refrigerating it for at least an hour. That buttercream is really soft. I mean, it's going to kind of squish out. It's going to be delicious. If you just couldn't wait, you know, knock yourself out. But you are going to get cleaner slices if you give that buttercream a chance to firm up a little bit.
Cool beans. And then the last one is, you showed the other cake, the drier one. Which one should be used? I missed the reason for that. They tuned in. So they just asked in a second question, but the first one was because you had the one cake you had made and then the one that you had set.
So the process is, once the cake goes in the oven and it's done, it comes out of the oven and it gets covered with foil until it no longer feels warm to the touch, just feels neutral or a little bit cool. And for sake of time in class, I baked one before the program started that was fully baked, covered in foil, and cooled, so that I could just put the one that I showed you in the oven, and then, oh, here, magic of TV, I have one that's already baked and cooled and ready to be filled.
Cool. So I want to be respectful of your time and of course the time of our patrons. We have two last questions that I want to wrap with. This one is this guest tuned in a little bit late and they're like, is Sweetbee a pastry store? Which I asked at the start of this. And where can we purchase these beautiful things you've made?
Oh, so I am no longer working in restaurants and bakeries. I work as a consultant and freelancer. So I work sort of business to business. I work with restaurants and I work with bakeries and I work with manufacturers, helping them with whatever pastry issue they're having, whether that's developing a recipe, training their staff, getting their kitchens set up. So I do not have a brick and mortar. So unfortunately, you know, unless we just somehow meet and we become friends, that's the only way that you'll be able to taste my pastries.
And
But
then
yeah,
last,
make it so you can make it and you can taste it. And it's going to be just as delicious.
yes, and for everyone, because I know a couple questions did pop up during the webinar, I saved the recipe till the end because I'm going to send it out with the link for the recording of today's program so that you can just get them both in one email and you don't get an overabundance of emails from me. Where do you purchase an offset spatula?
I mean, anywhere that you're going to get sort of like kitchen gadgets. So Sur La Table, Williams Sonoma, Michael's, Joanne, Amazon. There's lots of places to find them. They're like $5 or $6. They're really not very expensive. I put that in the dishwasher too. I have one that's like plastic and sort of flimsy, which I don't recommend. I use this for things where I'm not trying to spread frosting or cake because it's a little too flimsy. So you do want they're usually a black handle with like a silver blade, and that's what you want.
Wonderful. Well, Jessica, I want to thank you so much for spending this evening with us and sharing your talents and your creativity. And thank you everyone for logging in and joining us tonight. I wish everybody a happy holidays. Hopefully I will see all of you at future programs for the rest of December. But from all of us at the Schaumburg Library, and I'm sure from Jessica as well,